And so sometimes, Lord, we wonder if we're almost trying to be informants, trying to tell you about something you don't know about. It's not that. But Lord, you've told us that we can cast all of our cares on you because you care for us. And Lord, that's a big part of prayer. So we come before you today and we ask you, Lord, to minister into the lives of all of these who've asked us to pray for them. Janelle, and the list would just kind of be endless. Every week people mail in saying, could you pray for this? Could you pray for this one? And then, Lord, many hands went into the air a moment ago. Well, I don't know whether those needs are physical or spiritual, financial, families in trouble. I don't know, but you do. And so I lift each one to you. And corporately here, we pray for one another, wounded people praying for other wounded people. Lord, we're in this together. Now, Father, I pray that you would focus our heads and our hearts now on your word. Lord, speak to us. This message is a particularly difficult one to deliver properly, and I definitely want to do that. And so, Father, I pray that we would open up to what you might have for us. Lord, sometimes the truth is not only something we throw our hats in the air over, but it's sometimes something that we kind of pound our chests and drop our heads and say, oh me, over. But regardless of what the message would say to us today, I pray that we would have such a moment with you that we would walk away from here saying, it was good. It was good that we were there. So Lord, bless this time. Use this time to do whatever you want to do to us or say to us whatever you want to say. Lord, I pray it in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Well, check out the screens and you'll see what's going on at Fairview this week, and then I'll be back with the message.
Good morning, church family. We are thrilled that you're here to share and worship with us. Our church is led by Pastor Paul Blair and Pastor Dan Fisher. If this is your first visit, thank you so much for coming today. Please take the time to fill out a visitor card and drop it in one of our giving boxes, or simply hand it to one of our deacons. Church family, let's seek out our visitors and welcome them to our family. We are looking for volunteers to prepare and or deliver meals to our sick and shut-in church families. Suppose you can prepare but you can't deliver, no problem. If you can't cook but you can deliver, don't worry about that either, because Roberta Clark and Linda Meadows will be coordinating all those details. Sign-up sheets are in the east and west foyers. If you have questions, please see them or contact Roberta at 405-706-7965 or Linda at 405-401-1749. Have you ever wanted to share the gospel with someone but didn't know how? Evangelism Explosion is a ministry that trains people on how to share their faith in Christ. We'll be starting another session of EE on Sunday, October 2nd at 4:30 p.m. in room number 203. Please enter through the northeast door. There are sign-up sheets in both foyers, and if you have any questions, see Emmett Clark. Church family, this coming Wednesday, September 21st at 6:30 p.m., we will host Alex Newman. Alex is a regular speaker at our Liberty Pastors Training Camps, and his topic of discussion deals with globalism. And finally, on Wednesday, October 5th from 6:30 to 7:45 p.m., we will host Captain Seth Keschel, and he will be speaking to us about election integrity. Well, that's the announcement this week. We look forward to worshiping with you, and may God bless you.
Well, if you get the opportunity to come hear Seth, you need to do so. A lot of us are very concerned since the 2020 election about integrity in elections. And what we're concerned about is there's no integrity in our election process anymore. And I have lots of people ask me sometimes, Dan, why does it matter if we can't have fair elections? Does it even matter that we vote? Well, yes. You always do the right thing no matter what. It's never wrong to do the right thing, and it's never right to do the wrong thing. So we need to always do what is right. And as Daniel Webster said, what makes men good citizens also, what makes men good Christians also makes them good citizens. And so we need to be good citizens. But you need to come and hear Seth, because he's going to help us to understand what's going on in the world of elections and what needs to be done. And you know, God said in the book of Hosea that my people are destroyed because of their lack of knowledge. We need to know. And then Alex Newman, you need to be here Wednesday night. Alex is one of our speakers on day 2 of our Liberty training camps or boot camps. Alex is probably one of the best speakers you will ever hear. This guy is a walking encyclopedia of information when it comes to looking at the world and trying to see it with a biblical worldview. So he's going to be talking about globalism. And Alex is not only a great and very entertaining speaker, but he has all these one-liners that a lot of people don't catch all the time. And yet when he's speaking, Paul and I are just cracking up because of stuff that he says. And normally it just flies right over people's heads. Like, for instance, anytime Alex will say Bill Gates, he'll say Bill Gates of hell. He'll always add that to Bill Gates' name. And then if he mentions Nancy Pelosi, he'll always say the leader of the Communist Party in Congress. And so, you know, just things like that. You will enjoy Alex this Wednesday night. He'll be speaking in Tulsa, and then he's going to be coming down here. So come Wednesday night. Even if you don't normally attend on Wednesdays, we'll have a good teacher for a change, and come and listen. And Paul's not even here to hear that. But we'll have a great teacher. Alex Newman is one that you will really, really enjoy. Well, to kind of emphasize the craziness of the world that we're in, and the fact that some people will say, well, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the parties are the same. Listen to this. An organization called WPA Intelligence, they're a polling group, did a poll, and they discovered, this information came out this week, that 20% of Democrats believe a man can get pregnant. Now, I want you to think about that for just a moment. 1/5 of a political party actually believes that which is impossible biologically. Now, I understand the political correctness and all of that, but this shows you what happens when political correctness is allowed to trump actual truth and facts. It's just nuts. But it gets worse. This study found that 36% of white Democrat women who attended college believe a man can get pregnant. And if you want to read more about it, there's the link right there. You can find it on Daily Wire, and then their story will take you to other links. But that story talks about this recent study that's out. So when you listen to the world and you say, I think either I'm going crazy or the world's gone crazy, you got to know the world has gone crazy. It's probably not you. So be aware of that. Then, as kind of a lead in to this message today, what happened in Martha's Vineyard this week has been all over the news, as you know. Governor Greg Abbott down in Texas, the governor over in Arizona, and then the governor of Florida, Rick DeSantis, actually have been shipping illegals to the sanctuary states and cities around the country, since they say that they're a sanctuary city for illegal aliens. These governors have correctly decided, well, then we need to send you your fair share. Now, what was really, and I think it's kind of a brilliant move. Now, please don't misunderstand. We are for immigration, but we're for legal immigration, right? I mean, a nation with no borders is no nation. I mean, that's just nuts. Okay, so what you're looking at is a yard sign that can be procured at what would be the equivalent, I think, of the city hall of Martha's Vineyard. And so many of the very ritzy homes have these signs in their yards. Now, you got to remember, the people who live in Martha's Vineyard primarily are white, uber wealthy leftists who live in multi-million-dollar homes, all right? Just so you can get this. Now, I want you to listen to what their sign says. We respect women. Well, we do too. We value black lives. We do too, but we actually just value life. We stand with we start the part company a little bit here, LGBTQ community members. We stand with immigrants. Well, if they're legal, yeah, we do too. With refugees, well, America's always been a place where true political refugees can find a home. Unfortunately, these mass caravans coming from, Central America and all that, they're not refugees. They're just looking for all of the goodies in America. With indigenous peoples, well, we do too, but we just really are about people, not so much indigenous people. With people of all faiths, we stand with our community. And I want you to notice below all of the different languages, all are welcome here. Hate has no business here. Okay, now if you've been following the news, Governor Ron DeSantis sent 50. Now understand, get the number, 50 illegals to Martha's Vineyard. Now you understand that that's typically a good hour on the southern border of illegal immigrants. So all of these border towns in Texas and in Arizona are dealing with just a flood of illegals coming over the border, basically with no resistance whatsoever from our government. And the open borders crowd are in charge, and they're breaking the law. I mean, President Biden should actually be arrested and impeached for breaking the law, because that's what he did. You're always talking about Donald Trump. But anyway, what I find incredibly hypocritical, and we all don't like hypocrites. We don't like hypocrisy. Here these folks are saying, we're a sanctuary community, all are welcome here. 50, not 500, not 5,000, not 50,000, 50 illegal immigrants, and you know what they're now calling this? A humanitarian crisis. Those 50 were only in Martha's Vineyard a little over a day, and the leaders of the community were able to work with the military in Massachusetts and having them transferred to a military facility. So here they have all these signs in their yards, all are welcome here unless you're an illegal from Texas, Florida, Arizona, or Mexico or wherever. Now, guys, what that is hypocrisy. And I'm just wondering now how quickly these signs will disappear from these yards in Martha's Vineyard, since they really don't practice what they preach. And how funny is it that Northeasterners believe that open borders are just wonderful until those illegals come to their community. And then all of a sudden, it's not such a good thing, right? So that's hypocrisy. We don't like that. If you look around you in the world today, you can see a whole lot of it. Now, it's really easy for us to see the hypocrisy of others. Sometimes, though, it's a little more difficult to see our own hypocrisy. Even when we don't mean to be hypocrites, when we're trying hard to not be hypocritical. So today I want to preach a message to you that, frankly, I have struggled with. Not the content of it. It's all correct. I've just struggled with delivering this sermon because I know it hits hard. It hits me hard. It hits you hard. And I'll relate a story that happened at the end of the first service to show you how it hits me. So I'm not immune from what I'm about to preach to you. But I think it is really easy to become myopic in our Christianity. Of course, if you're myopic, you're nearsighted. It's so easy to not be able to see further than your own nose. How often have we said, well, that's as clear as the nose on your face? And yet sometimes we don't see past our own noses, and we don't mean to be that way. See, that's the thing. And so what I'm going to preach today, I know is not something any of us want to be. And probably in our hearts, we're not. But it is so easy as a believer to get hooked into a routine that we don't realize that we've actually become myopic in our own Christian experience. Now, to illustrate what I'm talking about, this week, we received an email from a wonderful family who was struggling with having visited here for a pretty good period of time. Now, I realize that their experience is not everyone's experience, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But it's an email that no pastor ever wants to receive. But it's an email that you need to hear, that I need to hear. So I want you to hear a portion of it. The person said, I write this with pain in our hearts. Since we've been coming to your church, that would be this church, and loving it, we have felt avoided and unfriended. We have never experienced such tangible rejection in all our years of Christian fellowship. We have never felt so excluded or left out as at Liberty Church, Liberty Edmond. And then they said something that I need to hear, you need to hear. Talk is cheap when it comes to accepting new people into the fold. And we've been shocked by the coldness we have felt. Perhaps this is just God letting us know that this is not our church. But it still seems rather unchristian to us. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this is very unusual for us as believers. So, we will continue our search for a church home. Now, I want you to know that I know this family, and I've been in contact with this family. And they're not dissing us. They're not mad at us. In fact, they love us. But this story, I fear, though it's not the story of everyone, and I'll recount that in just a moment, is probably more common than we would want to believe. And it's not just this church. I think it's American Christianity, just to be quite honest with you. But since we can't deal with American Christianity, we have to deal with Liberty Edmond Christianity. And so this is a sermon that, quite frankly, I don't want to preach, but I think I need to hear it. And I think you need to hear it. So if you'll understand my heart and understand the hearts of those who wrote this, I think God can use it to make us a better church. So I want to ask you this question. Did you reach out to this particular family? Did you make yourself a friend to them? Now, right about now, you're thinking, well, how can I do that? I don't even know who you're talking about. So let me rephrase the question. When was the last time that you actually went out of, should say your instead of you, went out of your way to make someone who appears to be new to our church feel truly welcome and wanted? Take this particular family out of the equation. When was the last time that you did that for someone? Let me ask another question. When was the last time you opened up your own fellowship circle? See, we all have one. We feel comfortable in that circle because we've known each other for a period of time. So we kind of run together, have lunch after church, or we get together for fellowship. And that's great, by the way. We all need that. When was the last time you opened up that fellowship circle and made it easy for a person or a family new to our church or to you fit in? When was the last time you did that? When was the last time you invited someone you do not know to lunch after church or to your home for a meal? See, typically we don't do that, do we? Now, it's not that we don't mean to. It's not that we mean to be unfriendly. It's just that we have a routine. I have a routine. I have a circle of fellowship that I feel very comfortable with. And I just naturally click into that gear, right? You do too. It's not anything intentional. It's not something that I do because I'm mean or hard-hearted. But I do it. And I'll bet you do too. So what does it mean when we say we want to welcome someone to Liberty Edmond? What does that mean? What does it mean to welcome someone to our church? Does it mean that you shake hands with them and you say something like this, welcome to Liberty Edmond, or if you're kind of a long-timer, welcome to Fairview/Liberty Edmond, however you do it. And then you go back to your own routine? Because you see, for most churches that I've ever known anything about, that's kind of what that means. I mean, we would even have times in our services, but we're not the only ones. Churches all over the country do it, where we stop and everybody shake a hand, right? One of the only reasons we don't do that anymore here is we're on such a tight time schedule, having gone to 2 services. But for most of us, welcoming someone to the church is kind of a glad shake and say, hey, welcome. Well, that's good. That's a first step. But does that really make someone feel embraced and accepted? No, in fact, what that is surface, and go back in your own mind to when you visited a church for the first time, or Does making someone feel welcome mean making them feel welcome by inviting them into your life circle? See, that's different, isn't it? By the way, that's harder. That takes more work. It kind of knocks me out of my routine. And plus, some would say, well, Dan, there's so many new people here, or we've grown so much, I don't know who's new, and I don't want to offend somebody. You know what I do? I just assume that people that I don't know, they're new. Now, if they say, well, man, I've been coming here for 8 months, I say, well, then, boy, my mistake. I am so sorry. It is still great to meet you. Now, to let you know how susceptible I am to this, I had someone come up to me after the first service who listened to this sermon, who said, do you know my name? I said, yes, it's spelled Jones. Have you ever done that? How do you spell that last name? Jones, Jones. No, I had to look at that person. I said, no. This person had just been on stage here playing an instrument. And I didn't know their name. I was embarrassed. Now, it wasn't anything on my part that was intentional. What I'm saying is this is a common malady that we all face because, see, we have created such fast-paced lives that we got to fit this in, and then I've got other places to be. I've got things to do. Cell phones have been a wonderful and horrible invention and addition to our lives. They've connected us with people that we used to couldn't connect with easily. It allows us to communicate, and at the same time have probably isolated us more than anything we've ever had. It's made us rude. We'll be right in the middle of visiting with someone and take a phone call. What? We would have never done that back when we had the old rotary dials and the ones that have a cable on them. We'd just let the dang thing ring, right? We'd answer it later if they call back. But now, see, it's on the hip, in the pocket. Pull it out, and we'll just, hey, hold on just a minute. Yeah, I'd like to have a cheeseburger. I mean, it's not like it's something really important. What does that say to the person that we just stopped so we can talk about my cheeseburger? See, so all of us probably make these mistakes. So here's what I'd like to say. We must be very intentional if we're going to make people feel welcome as a church. Because we have grown. We don't have the kind of facility that we really need. We've outgrown this facility. Someone just said to me a while ago, man, we love coming here, but boy, you guys have got a space problem. Well, you're telling me. We need a great big commons area where we can all gather. It's something like what we had over at Trinity when I was there, where you had a place where you didn't feel like you were herded down a chute like cattle, right into the cattle truck or right into the sale barn. So part of the problem is just our facilities themselves. And it's no dig on anybody who designed these. These were designed to do what they've done for years to do it well, but now we've outgrown this. And so obviously we have to begin to think about, what does that mean? What does it mean to welcome people? So I would suggest to you that when you come in here on Sunday mornings, you're going to see one of two things. You're either going to see an auditorium filled with people like this one, or you're going to see individual people that you don't know or seem to be weighted down with some burden. But you're going to see one or the other. I've told you this before, but I want to say it again, especially because of this message. When Dr. Bill Bennett was my mentor, he said, Dan, don't ever forget that every Sunday, you're going to look out across an auditorium where you pastor, and you're going to see a broken heart on every pew. Now here it would be a line of chairs, same deal. And I kind of let that blow by me. I knew it was true, but okay, thank you, Dr. Bennett, that's really great, and I'll use that eventually. But he's right. Over the years, I've been overwhelmed as a pastor with what I know about what's going on in people's lives. I don't know all the details, don't want to know unless they want me to know, but I know that what he said was right. You know, every Sunday when I am up here and I ask for prayer requests as we bow our heads, and I'll say, if you'll just lift your hand, almost without fail, there's 2 or 3 hands on every line. Now, those hands represent brokenness at some level, either a health issue of their own, or someone they know and love, or there's a job issue or a family breakup. There's something, right? And in most of those instances, these people are cringing under the load of this. And so they feel this, they feel it heavily. Well, you remember what Jesus said. Jesus said that when you do it to these, you've done it to me, but when you haven't done it to the least of these, you haven't done it to me. So whenever we see this auditorium, what are we going to see? So you're either going to make an attempt to ensure these people are made to feel genuinely welcome and cared for, or you're going to leave these broken hearts on pews or in seats to their isolation and their struggle by themselves. I'm going to do the same. And we have to understand that, and that's why I popped this up there a little bit early, but that's why Jesus said, when you did it not to me, when you did it not to the least of these, you did it not to me. See, that makes it incredibly personal and ought to matter to us. When I recognize that I'm really ministering to the Lord through people, or I'm not ministering to the Lord through the people I'm not ministering to. Now, I don't know that this church is any different than most every church I've ever been a part of, but I will tell you this, we struggle with this. And we're actually struggling with it more now than we ever have because of the growth that we've experienced, because we've actually doubled in the last year and a half or so. That's a real challenge. So, for instance, we had a ministry in a church that I pastored before, a very large church, that I think we called it the care ministry. I can't remember, but it was like a doorway ministry. Now, let me tell you what that was. That was more than just people at the doors greeting people saying, good morning, glad to have you. That was more than people out in the parking lot saying, man, we're so glad that you're here. No, that was just little pieces. Let me tell you what that really was. When a new family would come to our church, we had trained the members of these teams to spot them immediately and immediately begin to reach out to them and touch them. And then as they made their way into the building, they were carefully handed off to a different team. And this team would begin to get to know them and say, listen, you know, what can we do for you this morning? How can we help you? If they had little children, they'd help them get their children to the children's area and get them checked in. If they hadn't had a cup of coffee or a donut, we had a coffee shop there where they could have a donut, a cup of coffee. If they were early enough, they could have biscuits and gravy. We had all kinds of things that they could have access to. But this team would see to it that these people really were welcomed. Then they would get them into the auditorium, find them a place to sit. They'd say, now listen, I'll be back at the end of the service, so that the person or the family would enjoy the service. And then at the end of the service, that couple, typically it was a couple, sometimes it was just one, would meet them at the end of the service and say, listen, we hope you enjoyed it today. Let us help you get your kids, or let us help you get all your stuff together. And they would go with them outside to the car. Then that afternoon, they'd receive a very short phone call, not some kind of dissertation. They'd say, hey, listen, I don't take up much of your time, but I was the one who welcomed you there today and kind of helped you. Hey, just wanted to hope that you had a great time in our church. If we can do anything to help you, please let us know. Then at the end of that week, that same person would give them another call and say, hey, we were so glad to have you last Sunday. We don't know whether you're planning on coming back this Sunday, but if you are, I hope to see you again. If I can do anything to help you, please let me know. Look me up when you get there. The Monday after they visited our church, there was a letter on my desk, personalized to them, unsigned. The letter I had written. And I would sign it, each one, with a different color of ink, so they would know this wasn't just some form letter. I had written and signed that letter to them, just basically telling them, we are so glad that you were here. Let us know how we can help you. We'd love to become your home. Now, that was the doorway ministry. Out of all the things that people ranked us on, because every now and then we'd have guests to rate us. We'd ask them, tell us how we've done. Do you know what the top ministry always was? It wasn't the preaching. It wasn't the worship. All those were good, but that's not what they always ranked at the top. You know what they ranked at the top? The doorway ministry. Our ministry was so important that they wore special shirts and vests that were coveted by the membership. We almost had a waiting list of people wanting to train. You had to train to be a part of this ministry. You didn't just sign up and do it. You were trained. And they wore those shirts with distinction. Now, we tried about a year and a half or 2 years ago to get this ministry started here. Now, just at the very infant stages, not all that other stuff I'm telling you about. And do you know that we've had a really hard time just getting folks to join that ministry here? In fact, if you took the folks out of that ministry that came with me here when we merged back almost 4 years ago, that ministry might not have enough people left in it to operate. That should not be. That should not be. Now, here's the thing. Most of us are not mean. Now, I will tell you, some of the meanest people I've ever met are church people. In fact, there are a lot of times when I tell God, God, I really love you, but I don't think much of your folks. So, I've often said that to him. And what really disturbs me is he says, neither do I. No, he doesn't. He doesn't do that. But some of the meanest people I've ever met are church people. Now, I'm not so sure they were saved. But church people. But that's not you. You're not like that. You care. And you want to show that you care. We have to do that. We live in a very sterile, isolated, hard world. Maybe harder than it's ever been in my lifetime. And people come here typically looking for friendship and inclusion. Sometimes they're looking for answers. Their life's coming apart. Do you remember how scary it is to visit a new church? I mean, you don't know what they're going to do. They may have you to stand up, put a spotlight on you, and ask you to start quoting scripture. I mean, you never know what a church is going to ask of new people, right? And you remember when you have visited a church for the first time, how antsy you were about it? Well, everybody's like that. Now, how can we be the great church that God wants us to be if we're not cognizantly aware of that and we're ministering to people intentionally? Now, let me show you how it sometimes happens. In that doorway ministry that we had a brand new member who had gone through the training. His name was Jim. Great guy. Well, one of the rules that our team worked with is that we didn't allow regular members of the church to park in the guest parking. They knew that. The church knew that. We'd made it clear. We had areas designated for guests, and members didn't park there. Well, this was Jim's first day on the job. So he's out in the parking lot. He sees this car come almost sliding around the corner. They're late. And they're trying to get there in time to get into the service, and they pull right into the guest parking. But he recognized them. He knew they weren't guests. They've been coming to that church for years. So he politely walked up to them and said, hey, listen, I'm new on the job today, but one of the things I'm supposed to do is to tell you, if you're a member, you can't park here. Would you mind parking in the overflow? Well, now, what would you expect Christians to say, or how would you expect them to respond to that? We're sorry, we didn't think anybody'd see us. You're right. And they pull out. No, the lady got out of the car and proceeded to cuss Jim out on a church parking lot. Jim came to me. I heard about it between services, and I went to Jim and he said, I'm quitting. This is my first day, but I'm quitting. If people are going to treat me like, and I told him, I said, look, they treat me the same way, so don't feel bad. But I said, look, Jim, this doesn't happen normally. Just hang with us. Well, he did, and he became one of the greatest members of that team and is a wonderful guy. But what I'm telling you is that can happen. Now, some of you are saying, well, this family that sent you this email, that's not my experience, or that's not what somebody else. Well, you got to remember that some people find it easier than others to kind of fit. Maybe it's personality. Some people are more outgoing, some are not. Maybe it's people that have come here already knew a few people here, so it made it easier for them because they could immediately attach themselves to the people they already knew. I mean, there's different kinds of circumstances, different kinds of people and personalities. But what is our job? So I want to ask you another question. I want you to think about this. Why do you come here? You say, well, that's the dumbest question I ever heard. Well, let's think about it. Why do you come here? Please don't answer it to yourself by saying, because I like it. Because that's not the right reason. I hope you do like it, but that's not the right reason. So let me ask it this way. Is it to be a part of your fellowship circle that you love? Well, that's good. If you have a fellowship circle, that's wonderful. We're not doing a real good job in creating small groups here. Part of it is our facilities. It's very difficult for us to do. We don't have the room. We need small group ministry. That's part of our future. Maybe God's going to begin to put that on your heart right now. But do you come here because of your fellowship circle? Maybe you come here to participate in your ministry that you love. You're part of a ministry, and you're here because you love that. But here's what I want to ask you. What if that ministry that you love and you're involved in, or the fellowship niche that you love and feel comfortable in, disappeared and no longer existed? That could happen, by the way. What if your ministry that you love so much, or your circle that you love so much, would you still come to church at all? And even if you did, would you attend with the same passion and excitement that you do now? See, I believe that this is an American church problem. We've become so callous, so hard, so busy, so fast age that it's just get this done, get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out. And we're all into these routines. And we don't have time to love one another and to be the church. So I want to tell you this story. Those of you who know the Black Robe story well will recognize this man's name. This is a Presbyterian preacher by the name of James Caldwell. He pastored, as you can see, in Elizabethtown, New Jersey in the 1760s, 70s, and 80s. He was one of the Black Robe guys. In fact, it may jog your memory that at the Battle of Springfield, New Jersey in 1780, he was the preacher that when his men ran out of wadding, rode down to the First Presbyterian Church of Springfield. It wasn't his church, but it was another Presbyterian church. He rode down there. There's a picture of the church right there. He went inside and began to gather up hymn books. Now's the story beginning to make sense to you. And you remember he went back and threw the hymn books out to his men. And many of the songs in that hymn book were written by a hymn writer named Isaac Watts. And these men are tearing Isaac Watts' hymns out and shoving them down their flintlocks and then firing away at the redcoats while that preacher's yelling, "Give them Watts, boys, put Watts into them." Yeah, that's James Caldwell. His wife, Hannah, though it's debated back and forth as to whether it was an accident or intentional, was actually killed by a British soldier when they invaded Elizabethtown. Shot right in the chest, killed instantly. What you're looking at on the right is one of the older renditions of the county seal of Union County in New Jersey. Can you believe that her story is still the county seal of a county in the state of New Jersey, of all places? Now, they put her outside the house there because it's hard to depict the fact that she was actually inside. But a few years ago, a medallion was created that shows her in the house where she actually was, and the redcoat shooting her through the window. It was a horrible tragedy, and her story has been retold over and over and over. Now let's go back to James Caldwell. I want you to hear this little portion out of my book that tells about the dedication of the people in his church. Some of you have heard this before, but if you haven't, you need to hear it. I want to read it to you. As the British moved ever closer to Elizabethtown, the Caldwells and other citizens of Elizabethtown moved back and forth between Elizabethtown and the small village of Connecticut Farms nearby for safety as the tide of war ebbed and flowed in the various battles and British occupations around the area. With his parsonage and church unoccupied much of the time, they were converted for use as a hospital for sick and wounded American soldiers who were often forced to sleep on the floor and eat their meals in the church pews. So because of that, consequently, the church itself was often hardly fit for Sunday services. Nevertheless, Caldwell and his congregation worshiped in the building anyway, as the congregation was often forced to stand for the entire service since there were no seats available. Unfortunately, when the British finally occupied Elizabethtown to show their intense hatred for Caldwell and his people, they and the local Tories burned the parsonage and church on the night of January 25th, 1780. Now, I want to ask you, if when you were getting ready to come over here today, you knew that when you got here there wasn't any place to sit. If you also knew that the place was going to be filthy with dirty and bloody bandages, and was going to have dirty and wounded and smelly soldiers lying on a lot of the seats, and you were going to have to stand for the entire service because of that, would you still have come? See, I'm told that there are churches in places like Siberia and other places that have really harsh weather and harsh governments, that people will hike lots of miles in bitterly cold weather with deep snow, knowing that when they get to this little church that they're going to attend, it'll already be full. And they're going to stand in the weather the whole time. And they've put together a little crude PA system where they've got a little cheap speaker in a box that sounds horrible. They hook a wire to it and they set it outside the window of the church. And there's more people standing outside listening to the sermon and the weather than there are people on the inside. Would we get up and walk to church if we knew that was the situation that we were going to face? See, I think for most American Christians, the answer is no. So right here in the last few minutes of this message, I want us to consider three things that ought to dominate our minds when we gather together on Sundays. And I hope that you'll not turn me off. First of all, when we come here, we should be missional in our minds and our hearts. You say, what in the world is missional? Well, you're on a mission. See, missional people live life on a mission. They don't just live life because they're alive and they need to get from day to day and week to week and month to month. No, they are missional. They're on mission. Now, whether or not you live that way or not, you should, because you are. God has put you on a mission. There's a reason why He left you here once He saved you. There's a lot of church folk that I've known, God would have been doing the church a favor if the moment they'd gotten saved, He had taken them on to heaven and just gotten them out of the way. But God left you. God left me here because He has a mission for you. He has a mission for me. I don't know what that mission is for you. I constantly struggle with knowing what that mission is for me. But I should be missional when I come here, meaning I ought to be on the lookout for opportunity to do something for someone else, not looking for my seat. Read this passage of Scripture here with me in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Not necessarily out loud, but just look at it. Paul was writing to a church in Corinth that had this problem. He said, now in giving these instructions, I do not praise you, since you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, that those who are approved may be recognized among you. In other words, he says, it's obvious you've got divisions because some aren't a part of it, and I've heard about it. What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you. He says, therefore, my brethren, when you come together to eat, you got to remember that they would celebrate a big Lord's Supper, and they called it an agape feast. The problem was people were gouging and elbowing one another and getting to the head of the line, and they wouldn't bring much to eat, but they'd eat a whole lot. I'll never forget, we used to have one of these on Wednesday nights, and everybody would bring a meal, and this one great big family, the husband was almost 7 feet tall. I mean, he was huge. They had a big family. They'd bring Jell-O and eat everybody's roast beef. I never could understand that. It made me so mad. What I wanted to do is head them off at the pass and give them all a big bowl of Jell-O and say, there's your supper. This is what was going on here. They'd gouge and push everybody out of the way. And so those who weren't willing to fight for a spot were getting shoved to the back. And by the time they got up there, the food was gone. because these other guys were pigging out. He says, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. But if anyone is hungry, in other words, if you're coming to church just to get a free meal, eat at home, lest you come together for judgment. And most of us would miss that, but you know, in another part in that chapter, he says that God had judged some of them, and some of them were dead because of it, and others were really sick because they were so obnoxious in their church services. Now, it's hard to believe that church people could be this way, but I'm telling you, they can. And sometimes they are. Now you say, well, that could never happen here. We're good people. Well, we are good people, but it not only can happen here, it has. Let me give you an example. When we, meaning I, came over here almost 4 years ago, and we brought about half of the congregation from Yukon because they wanted to. We came here. I know that was a difficult transition for everybody. I get that. It was difficult for us. It was difficult for you. But you know, for 2 or 3 months, I would have some of our folks from Yukon come to me and say, man, I don't know if I can keep coming. I say, what are you talking about? Well, I just don't know. I said, man, you got the best preaching in the world. What in the world are you talking about? And they said, well, you can't believe what's happening. I said, well, tell me. They said, we will try to sit down somewhere and people say, that's saved. That seat's saved. And so we'll go somewhere else and we'll start sitting down. That's saved. They said, we can't find a place to sit. People are saving seats, and it ain't for us. Now, we laugh at that, but do you know that really was happening, and some of our folks quit coming? They quit coming from Yukon because they said, look, if I've got to fight for a seat. Now, what should a mature Christian actually do in a situation like that? If someone comes up to us and say, look, I think that's somebody else's seat, but you can have mine. Years ago, Pam and I were real young. We'd just been married not all that long. And I'm preaching on Sundays in little churches out in the country and filling in the pulpit. And we were going to sing before I preached. And so we'd gotten there early and we'd kind of set everything up so it was going to work out okay. So they're having Sunday school. So the auditorium was empty. So we just found a good pew and we sat down. Well, I didn't notice that the scoreboard was right there. You remember the scoreboard that churches used to have? They'd count all the attendance, Bibles brought, offering. It was a scoreboard. So we sat down there. Well, Sunday school's over, and this lady comes in. Well, I guess I'll get my stuff and move. And I didn't know that was her seat. And she reached down under the pew and dragged all that stuff out and marched off in a huff because we had actually sat in her place because she would adjust the scoreboard after Sunday school and she'd sit right. We didn't know that. Now, in good Christian love, I wanted to take the scoreboard and hit her in the head with it, but I didn't. I wanted to give her the right hook of Christian fellowship, but I didn't. Now, what was the more mature response? Just wait, and you can adjust the scoreboard after church. Don't go to those two young people who actually are there to be your guest speaker for the day and blast him because he sat in your seat. We should be missional. Quickly here, we should be merciful. The Bible is filled with mercy, first of all, from God to us. But what about us to one another? What is mercy? To show kindness or concern for someone in serious need. The feeling of one who is moved by the sight of another's suffering and in a way shares in it. We're to be merciful. Man, we ought to come in here thinking, how can I help? The Bible says, show mercy with cheerfulness. Wisdom from above is full of mercy and good fruits. Paul says in Philippians 2, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. In Romans 12, it says we're to be given to hospitality. Romans 15, therefore receive one another, just as Christ also received us. Peter says, be hospitable to one another. And I like the little addition, without grumbling. In other words, don't fake it and then walk away going, got my seat. I hate those people. No, be genuine about your hospitality. If you're going to be hospitable, be genuinely, not like that lady at that little country church that adjusted the scoreboard. Even God told the Jews people that were not Jews that were living among them that were called strangers. It says, the stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and don't forget, I'm God. In other words, he says, you know what it's like to be a stranger? Now don't forget it. See, the problem is we all forget. Now here's the crazy thing. Sometimes non-Christians are more hospitable than church folks. That's hard to believe, but it is. Listen to this. Acts 28, Paul is on an island where these people are not believers. And listen to what he says. And the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire, made us all welcome because of the rain that was falling because of the cold. In that region there was an estate of the leading citizen of the island, whose name was Publius, and he received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. Sometimes we are outdone by unbelievers. That should never happen. Never. The Bible even says that to be hospitable is a requirement for a preacher. Guy can't be a pastor if he doesn't practice hospitality. That shows you how much God places, how much value he places on it. So we should be missional. We should be merciful. And then last of all, God warns us that if we don't show mercy, he'll do the same to us. We should be malleable. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means moldable. In fact, I toyed with which word to use, malleable or moldable. Us in Arkansas, moldable. For you city slickers, it's probably malleable. But anyway, it means able to be molded, right? Jeremiah chapter 18, verses 1 through 6 gives us what God's saying. You ever read that where he talks about how the clay is placed on the potter's wheel and then the potter works that clay and the clay then conforms to whatever the potter wants to make out of it? Have you ever tried that, by the way? That is one of the toughest things you'll ever do. In school, took an art class. I couldn't even get the clay to stick to the wheel. I mean, I'd put it on the wheel, boom, it'd fly off, and I'd go get it. In fact, we kind of learned that if you pointed it a certain way, you could hit people with clay, you know, boom, boom, like that. But anyway, you get that clay to stick, and then you begin to water it down, and what do? Well, somebody has some skill, begins to make something very useful and beautiful out of it. But the clay has to be soft. And I fear that sometimes our clay gets hard. And so when I come to church, I not only need to be on mission, looking, and I don't care whether I embarrass myself and welcome someone that's been coming for 9 months. They'll understand. Let me tell you, they'll appreciate it. Doesn't matter. If you don't remember their name, don't sit there and act like you know their name. Just say, I am so sorry, forgive me, but tell me your name again. So I need to be missional. Secondly, I need to be merciful. I need to be looking out for others instead of me looking for me. It's not about me. It never has been. And then I need to be malleable. See, I need to come in here and then sit down and say, God, you might have something you want to say to me. You might have a little tweak or twist that you want to make to me. God, would you soften me up so that you can do that? See, I suspect that the average person in church today in America is hardened clay, and God twists and he pulls, and all it does is break the clay. And the clay walks away frustrated, and God is not happy. You and I will only be fulfilled when we allow the master potter to soften us up and make us into something useful. Without him, I'm useless. So I want to close with these two illustrations. Most of you are familiar with what we call the Holy Land or Israel. Now, one of the interesting things to me, and you may have heard this illustration before, so if you have, just please humor me and let me do it. There's two great bodies of water in Israel. One I call the Galilee Sea, and one I call the Dead Sea. Now, that's because it's the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, right? And the interesting thing is that the Sea of Galilee or the Galilee Sea is filled with life. We've all read about the fishermen like Peter and others who have caught fish in the Sea of Galilee, and millions of people over the centuries have been fed by fish that come out of the Sea of Galilee because it's filled with life. But then when you go south, you get to the Dead Sea, there's nothing in it. In fact, it is so heavy in minerals and salts that you can literally float like an inner tube and not have to work to float. It's a lifeless body of water. Now, here's the amazing thing, and you probably already know this, but if you haven't thought about it recently or have never heard it, you need to get it. Notice that both bodies of water get their water from the same source, the Jordan River. The Jordan River flows into the north side of the Galilee Sea, flows into the north side of the Dead Sea. So if you look right there, you can see it. So here we've got the Jordan River here and here. But notice there's a big difference in these two bodies of water. The one that's alive receives water, but what does it do with it? It gives it. What does the Dead Sea do? It only receives. There's no outlet. And I think that is a working object lesson for you and me. If all we ever do is get, but we never give, we're dead. Those who are alive give as well as they receive. Which are you? Are you a Galilee Sea Christian or are you a Dead Sea Christian? So it's critical for a church like this. It's critical for any church. So I want to close with this story. People were coming to this church on a particular Sunday morning and they saw something they'd never seen before. Sitting on the steps right in the front of the church was a homeless guy, a vagrant. He was filthy, his clothes were raggedy, long unkept hair, beard, all grown out into a mess. And they thought, my gosh, what are we going to do? We don't want him cluttering up the front of the church. We got people coming in here. They're going to have to walk by this guy. So most people just did their best not to look. Don't look, kids, don't look. And they just go around and ignore him. A few people kind of reached out to him and gave him a little bit of money, but they really wanted him to go. So, everybody had seen this and they're kind of bothered by it. So they get into the church. Well, what really amazed them is that when it came time for the preacher to step up to the pulpit, this was the first Sunday of their new pastor. This vagrant walks up to the podium. They thought, my gosh, the man's invaded the church now. He's out there begging and now he's in here. And when he got up there, he stood there for just a moment. He reached up and he pulled off his wig. And then he removed his fake beard. And he pulled off his outer clothing all tattered and dirty to reveal nice, clean, presentable clothing. The vagrant that they had been avoiding and ignoring on the front step was their new pastor. And he said, I know some of you are shocked, but the reason I did this is I wanted to know what kind of a church I'm pastoring and to alter my ministry accordingly. I'm telling you, friends, there are people that need us. God wants to use us. We're not a bad church. We're a great church. But I'm telling you, we don't need people falling through the cracks because they didn't feel loved and cared for. We don't need to walk in here looking for our seat. We need to walk in here looking for an opportunity to be a blessing to someone. To not worry about being embarrassed because we can't remember someone's name, or we might welcome someone that's been attending for 3 months. I'm telling you, they won't care. The old saying says, they don't care how much we know till they know how much we care. So myopic. Are you myopic? Are you a myopic Christian? Can you only see what's in front of you? Or will you allow the Lord to clear up your vision and you see a whole world around you? You don't just see a room full of people, you see people in a full room. Because there's a big difference. Man, I want us to be the most welcoming, loving, accepting church in this state. Because we've got a message that they need to hear. But we can't let us hurt the message. Would you bow your heads with me? Father, in Jesus' name, we come to you right now. Now, Lord, I know that this has not been an easy message to hear or to receive because it hasn't been an easy message to preach. Father, I don't like to think that sometimes I'm not friendly because I want to be. I don't like to think that our church is not warm and inviting because we want it to be. But Father, right now, as we think about what we've heard, Lord, I just pray. I pray for every one of us in this room. I don't know what this message has said to each one of us. Maybe you've had something different to say to every one of us. I don't know. But here's what I pray. That we would not walk away, as is our routine, the same. That God, somehow, you would catch hold of our hearts. That ones like the folks who wrote us the email out of love and compassion and concern, that wouldn't happen again. Lord, I pray that you would help us to see beyond ourselves, that we'd walk in here missional and merciful and malleable, and we would not walk out the same. Lord, this old song that's being played has been sung thousands and thousands of times. I pray, God, that we would sing it and take it to heart. Guys, let's just sing an old refrain of this song. Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and thou biddest me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come. I come. I know we need to go, so here's what I'm going to do. If you would like to join this church, if you have needs and you'd like for someone to pray with you, maybe you don't even know if you're going to heaven. We have counselors standing right here, and they're going to wait. And as we're dismissed, if you want to do any of those things, you come and visit with them, and then we'll help you. God bless you for being here. Thank you for being attentive. I know that was a tough message to hear. Thank you for receiving it. God bless you. Have a great afternoon. You're dismissed. Have a great day.